Hello guys. Hello guys. So today we are going to be talking about the bones of the upper limb. So at the end of this video, you're going to get an overview of the bones of the upper limb. Then we're going to talk about two of the bones in details. We're going to talk about the clavicle, and then we'll talk about the scapula. So encourage us by subscribing to our channel, like and share with your friends. So let's dive into our business for today. So the bones of the upper limb, you already know that the upper limb is one of the regions of the human body, right? You have the right and the left, it's like occurring as a pair. And you know the upper limb is divided into regions, four regions majorly. We have the shoulder region, which is this. You have the arm region, the forearm, and the hand, right? So now we're going to talk about the bones in these regions, the bones in the shoulder region, the bones in the arm region, the bone in the forearm, and the bone in the hand. So this is just like a model. This is a model, and you can see you have one of the bone of the shoulder. This one is called the scapula. Then you have another one of the shoulder, that bone of the shoulder called the clavicle. We're going to talk about them in details. Then you have a bone of the arm called the humerus. This is the humerus. Then we have two bones of the forearm. One is medially placed and one is distally placed. And one is medially placed, one is laterally placed. So the one which is medially placed, that's this, is known as the ulna, while the one which is laterally placed is known as the radius. And then we have the bones of the hand. These are the bones of the hand. We have the one in your wrist, the bone in your wrist. These are the bones in your wrist. They are these bones here: scaphoid, lunate, tricipitrum, trapezium. We'll talk about them in full details. These are the bones. They are called the carpal bones. Then we have the bones of your palm and dorsum. This is your palm and this is your dorsum, right? You know the hand is divided into the wrist, palm, dorsum. You have your fingers, right? Your digits. So we have the bones of the wrist, which are called the carpal bones. We have that of the dorsum and palm and dorsum, called the what? Metacarpals. That's these bones you are seeing here. Then we have the phalanges. These are the phalanges. So these are the bones of the upper limb. The scapula, the clavicle, the humerus, ulnar bone, radius, the carpal bones, metacarpals, and the phalanges. So now we're going to talk about two of the bones in this video. We're going to talk about two of the bones of the upper limb. That's the bones of the shoulder region. We're going to talk about the clavicle, and we're going to talk about the humerus. So let's start with the clavicle. You can see the clavicle now. You can see this bone is S-shaped. You can see from the shape is S-shaped, right? And this bone, when you feel it now, palpate your shoulder region. This bone is very palpable. You can see it. This is the bone I'm feeling. It's palpable. It's subcutaneous, just beneath the skin. S-shaped, subcutaneous. So this bone now, for you to identify which bone this is, whether if this is the right or the left, what you need to do is you need to check out for the ends. We have the sternal end, we have the acromial end. So you check out for the acromial and the sternal ends, and then you check out for the inferior surface. From this bone now, I can see my sternal end here. This is my sternal end, and this is my acromial end. Then when I check the inferior surface, I look out for the inferior surface. I know normally that for this part of the bone close to the sternal end, the inferior surface is usually roughened because it has a roughening for the costoclavicular ligament. And I also know that the inferior surface of the lateral part of this bone also have a roughening, and that's for one for the tubercle called the conoid tubercle here, and another is the trapezoid tubercle. Talk about that. So once I check that, you can see from this now, this one is smooth. It's smooth, right? You can see it's smooth for the medial part. So I will say fine, this is almost like this. Look, it's smooth. Then you can see roughening area here. You can see the roughening area here. So now we say this part should be facing this way because this is sternal end. So it should be facing the what? You know, this sternal end is going to form a joint with the sternum called the sternoclavicular joint, right? So this point now, since the inferior surface here is roughened, while this superior surface of the sternal part is smooth, we say this is the left clavicle. Then to confirm, you see that this part is smoothing, the lateral aspect, the superior surface is smoothing, while the inferior surface for this lateral part is roughened. You can then say that this is the left clavicle. So we've talked about the clavicle. We said it's subcutaneous, L-shaped. We've identified it, site determination. So this is the left clavicle. So now, what do we talk about again? Then this clavicle has a sternal end, a shaft, and acromial end. Sternal end, shaft, and acromial end. The sternal end forms a joint with the sternum called the sternoclavicular joint. Then we have the acromial end, which forms a joint with the acromion of the scapula. That joint is called the acromioclavicular joint. Then let's look at the shaft. The shaft is further divided into two parts. Okay, look at it. The shaft is divided into two parts. You have this part running to this region, and we have this other part running to this region. You can see this part here. It is what? Convex. 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 This is what you used to remember. It's what? Convex. And when we say it's concave, like a cave, it's concave. So you can see this is convex, and this is what? Concave. So this part of the clavicle, this part of the shaft, is called the medial two-third. Because if you divide the clavicle into three parts, 1, 2, this from this region down here, two of the three divisions is what? Is convex. So the medial two-third is convex, and the lateral one-third is what? Concave anteriorly. While posteriorly, you can see it posteriorly. Posteriorly, the medial two-third is concave, while the lateral one-third is convex. We've talked about that now. Okay. So we can see also that the medial two-third is further divided into four surfaces. You have the superior surface, you have the inferior surface, you have the anterior surface, and then you have the posterior surface, right? So now, important thing you need to take note of is this. In the inferior surface, you have a roughening. You can see the roughening here. A roughening, look at it. You can see this roughening. This roughening is for the costoclavicular ligament. What do I mean by that? Costoclavicular. That is to say there's a ligament running from the costal cartilage of a rib to this clavicle. That's why it's called costoclavicular ligament. So this roughening here is for attachment of a costoclavicular ligament. So the costoclavicular ligament is going to connect this clavicle to the first rib, because the first rib is going to run from the posterior one and then run underneath this to insert, to like form an attachment with the sternum anteriorly. So there's a ligament that will connect this clavicle to that first rib. That's to give it stability, and that ligament is called the costoclavicular ligament, and it's going to form an attachment here. Then now that's it for the medial two-third. You also have within this region, you have a groove. If you observe carefully, there's a groove. So this groove is for what we call the subclavian artery. the subclavian arch will pass through this groove. It's called the subclavian groove. So that's the structure that pass through this groove. That's for the medial to third. Then for the lateral to third, you can see that the lateral 1/3, is divided into two surfaces and two borders. You have superior surface, inferior surface, then the anterior border and the posterior border. The superior surface is smooth, but inferior surface is roughened. It has tubercles. You can see this prominent tubercle. Just watch closely. You can see this prominent tubercle here. That's called the conoid tubercle, and that's for the attachment of the conoid ligament. The ligament is this conoid ligament is a medial part of the coraco-clavicular ligament. Then you also have a roughening here, a tubercle also around, that is just lateral to the conoid tubercle. That's called the trapezoid tubercle, for the attachment of the trapezoid ligament, which is the lateral part of the coraco-clavicular ligament. So I believe we've talked about the clavicle. We've talked about what it is, shape. We've talked about the side determination. This is the left. We've talked about the division, medial to third, and the lateral and third, concave, convex. We talked about the surfaces, division, medial to third, superior, inferior, anterior, posterior surface, then lateral and third, superior surface, inferior surface, anterior border, and the posterior border. That's it for the what? For the clavicle. So that's the clavicle. This is the anterior aspect. And this is the posterior aspect. So now we've talked about the clavicle. Let's now move on to the next bone, the scapula. So you can see the scapula here. You can see the bone. This scapula is, as you can see, is a triangular bone, right? It's triangular, right? You can see it. And this scapula is found in your what? It's lying on your posterior thoracic wall. You know your rib cage now, your rib cage. So it's going to lie on the posterior thoracic wall, and it's extending from ribs 2 to ribs 7. So it's going to extend from ribs 2 to ribs 7 in your on your posterior abdominal wall. Okay, so you can see this scapula is triangular. You can see it has surfaces, it has borders. So now let's go into describing them. So now let's start with this. You can see this anterior surface of the scapula. This is called the subscapular fossa. So the anterior surface of the costal surface has a fossa, has a depression called the subscapular fossa for attachment of the subscapularis muscle. That's for this anterior surface. Then we have the posterior surface, which you can see here. You can see the posterior surface. The posterior surface, you can see there's a difference. This posterior surface has like a projection running laterally. We've not talked about side determination. So the question now is what scapula, part of what scapula, is it the right or the left? You can see from this now that this is, you can see that this is, okay, this is your left. Why? The reason why your left is this projection must point laterally, and you can see your this bone, the humerus, forming an articulation with the glenoid what? Fossa. This is the what? Shoulder joint or the glenohumeral joint. Are you getting it? So this is the what? This is a left scapula. So we talked about the anterior surface, subscapular fossa. Then for the posterior surface, you have this projection, this ridge running laterally. It's called the spine of the scapula. So this spine of the scapula, will continue laterally. It will continue laterally and become the acromion of the scapula. This is the acromion of the scapula, which will form an articulation with the clavicle, which we have discussed. You can see if this is going to form an articulation with the what? It's going to form an articulation with the clavicle. That's what I talked about. That's the acromioclavicular joint. So this is the acromion, which is a continuation of the spine of the scapula. So this spine of the scapula is going to divide the posterior surface of the scapula into two foci. One is known as the supraspinous foci. You can see the supraspinous foci. The supraspinous foci. And this foci is for articulation, is for the attachment of the supraspinatus muscle. You've heard of the supraspinatus muscle. That's the importance of this, for the attachment to the supraspinatus muscle. Then you have this inferior part called the infraspinous fossa for the attachment of the infraspinatus muscle. So that's it for the posterior wall. Then you can see that the scapula is divided into borders and angles. You can also have you have also the lateral surface. This lateral surface, the most important bonish landmark you need to be aware of is this glenoid fossa. This glenoid fossa, which is for articulation with the what? With the head of the humerus to form the glenohumeral joint, which we normally know as the shoulder joint. So now for the borders, now we have the lateral border. This is the medial border, and we have the lateral border. Why? This pointing laterally, right? This pointing laterally. Why this pointing medially? If I just start my back now, this is my left. It's pointing what? Medially and what? Lateral. So you have the what? The medial border and the lateral border. We also have the superior border. So the superior border now continues and forms a structure, a big like prominent structure called the coracoid of the scapula. You know, it's just like a beak now. You know the beak of a chicken, right? Beak of chicken. So it's just beak like. You can see it looks like a beak. So it's called the coracoid foci of the scapula. That's what this is called. Okay, so I think we've covered it for now. We talked about the surfaces, we talked about the foci, we talked about the acromion, we talked about the coracoid process of the scapula, we talked about the glenoid. And okay, so that's it for this video. So I believe you guys understood this part of the lecture. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about the humerus. So this is Lawrence Trafan lecture. So I'm happy to have you guys in this lecture, in this class. So encourage us, subscribe to our channel, like, share with your friends. So I'm believing to see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.